Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to share with you the books that I read in the month of June. I completed 5 books in June, which is a little less than I normally do, but 2 of these books were pretty long, and one of them was long and also just a very slow read, but I'll get into that. So I'm going to go ahead and share what I read with you now. So the first book that I completed in the month of June was a buddy read that I did with Bobby over at Bobby Reads Too Much, and we read Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. Okay, this book was slightly disappointing. Okay, so basically this book is about 2 girls who become friends when they are 14, and it takes you through their friendship into adulthood, 30 years of friendship. And it begins in the 70s and then kind of goes into, so you kind of see them go through the different decades and their friendship grow as they grow and all of that stuff. The reason I think this was disappointing was because for me, the beginning of the book was really just drew me right in, and I really liked the characters. I really liked the 2 girls. There were kind of things about both of them that my teenage self identified with. But as the book progressed, it just started to become way too Lifetime movie cliche. I started kind of guessing everything that was going to happen and all of that kind of stuff. The one character, Tully, she became extremely unlikable for me, which was weird because at the beginning I really identified with her because she wanted to be a journalist, which was what my aspirations were at one time in my life. And so I really identified with her at first, but by the end I pretty much couldn't stand her. So that was kind of weird to have that kind of progression with a character. And then yeah, like I said, the story the ending was just so predictable. Bobby and I both saw it coming from a mile away, and we were just really, is that what's gonna happen? And then that's what happened. So all in all, it started out really strong, and then it just kind of wasn't that great. But I mean, I'm still going to read Kristen Hanna. Bobby and I are planning to do another buddy read of a Kristen Hanna book, I think at the end of the year. So we haven't given up on her because we both really loved The Nightingale. I really loved The Great Alone. So this one, it just wasn't as good as those 2, but I'm not going to stop reading Kristen Hanna anytime soon. But this book was a 3 out of 5 stars for me. Next up, I listened to an audiobook, and it is a pretty well-known one, I think, Orange is the New Black by Piper Kerman. This obviously was what the show Orange is the New Black became, where it got its inspiration from. It's about Piper and her time that she spent, I believe it was a 13-month sentence that she spent in a women's prison, and just basically what her experience was like. I think that the book was, because I couldn't help but compare it to the show as I was reading it, because I watched the show pretty much from the start when it started. I have not watched the most recent season, and then the final season is coming up really soon, so I should probably get caught up. But this is a lot more because it's real and the show is not, a lot more there's not as much drama. You find that Piper's experience wasn't that bad, though there obviously were things that she came across as a prisoner, injustices that she saw and things like that, in the way that the women were treated. But for the most part, her experience wasn't that bad. Nothing like what you see on the show. They definitely have created a lot more drama for the show, have made some more of the characters, though a lot of them are based off of people that she wrote about in this book, though a lot of the characters are completely different from the people that Piper actually lived with in the prison. So I think that it was a good memoir. It was eye-opening, but then at the same time, I felt like Piper, I don't know exactly what Piper learned from her experience, really, because there wasn't, at least in the audiobook, there wasn't any sort of afterword or anything where she talked about what she did when she left prison. So I kind of was left wondering, and I don't know because I haven't looked to find out, if she still talked or kept in touch with some of the friends that she made while she was in prison, or if she has done anything since leaving prison to try to create some sort of like reform for some of the things that she saw in the prison that she felt were, you know, things that needed to be fixed, or like injustices that needed to be dealt with. I don't know if she's actually done anything like that, or if she kind of just like left prison and just was like, bye, and like went back to living her like, you know, white privileged life. I don't know. So it was I kind of wanted to know more about her life after leaving the prison, and you don't get that in this story. And I just kind of felt throughout that she was humble, but I also felt like, and there are even times in the book where she acknowledges that she is definitely privileged. She was treated differently than some of the prisoners who were not white. And she acknowledges that a lot, but I felt like just a lot of it, she just kind of came across as just very privileged, and so her experience was different than what a lot of women, especially women who are minorities, what they experience in the same situation. So I don't know. I wouldn't say I totally connected with Piper. I thought that her story was fine. It seems like she's a nice person, but it just seemed to not like really resonate, because her experience, I think, just was not necessarily typical. I don't know. There's just something about it that I just didn't quite connect with. Yeah. So it was an okay memoir. I gave it 3 stars. Next up, I completed my difficult read for the month, my longest book and my most difficult book. That was Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. Okay, so this book is 560 pages or something like that. My first beef, and one of my main beefs with this book, is it was too long. It tells the story of a girl named Grace Marks who, and this is like based on a true story, though she does fictionalize some aspects of the story, who in the 1800s was convicted of murdering her employer and his housekeeper, who was also his lover. Her and this other, he was kind of like a barn hand, were convicted. He was hanged, she was given life in prison. And so like the kind of fictional part of the story in here is that a psychologist starts to kind of sit down with Grace to talk about what happened, because she has either intentionally or not intentionally just completely blacked it out. And there are parts about the day of the murder and afterward that she just does not, or claims that she doesn't remember. So he's kind of trying to break through that and help her break through that to find out what really happened. Was she really involved, or wasn't she? So that's kind of the gist of the story. So like I said, the book is a little bit too long. There were just things about the story that I felt were unnecessary. There were things about, like, the psychologist who is seeing her. He kind of has this kind of little side story that I felt like was unnecessary and didn't even really need to be in there, to be quite honest. And you are definitely left at the end not really knowing, not really given answers. Was Grace guilty or wasn't she? You don't really know. And because that's the way that the actual story is told, people don't know. And I didn't know until after I finished the book that, and so I guess this isn't a spoiler because it's fact, it happened, whatever, that Grace was actually let go from prison after, I think she was in prison for like 30 years and they let her go. And she went to America, because this takes place in Canada. She went to America and was like never heard of again. She changed her name. Nobody knows what happened to her. So you never really know if she actually did the things that she was accused of or what the deal was. So there were definitely aspects of this book I liked. I really liked, obviously, Margaret Atwood's writing. I like what she did with the story, and how she obviously touched on themes about feminism and the way in which criminals are treated when they're men versus when they're women. Because of course people thought, oh, she's just this weak little, she was like 15 years old, I think. Oh, she's just this sweet little 15-year-old girl. Like, she would never do that. Or was she this like evil woman who seduced this other barn hand and convinced him to kill these two people? We don't know. Who was Grace? We don't really know. I liked that she played on that, because you left not knowing and wondering. But yeah, this book took me a really long time to read, because it was very slow paced, because most of it is Grace kind of telling her life story up until the murders. And so you find out about her life. It wasn't great, but I don't know. You just feel, at least I felt while reading the book, that you just don't know Grace. You don't really know who Grace is. And you spend all this time with her and her story, and you still feel like you don't know. So I was a little bit underwhelmed by this one as well. Obviously, this is my second Margaret Atwood book. The first one was The Handmaid's Tale, which I loved. I'm obviously going to continue to read Margaret Atwood, so if any of you out there have any more recommendations for my next Margaret Atwood read, I would love to hear some, because I definitely enjoy her writing and want to read more of her stuff. This one was just a little bit long and underwhelming for me, and I gave it 3 stars. Next up, I completed a horror novel, which I feel like I haven't read a horror novel in a while. But I read Come to Dust by Bracken McLeod. This was a book that I got in a Nocturnal Reader's Box like 2 years ago, and I finally got around to reading it. It's about a guy named Mitch who is taking care of his niece, Sophie, because his sister just kind of dumped her with him and took off. So he's taking care of her. And sadly, pretty early in the book, she dies. But then like a month after she dies, this weird phenomenon starts happening where all of these dead children start coming back. Nobody knows why or how. What it means. There's all this speculation. Is it like the start of like the end of the world? Are these children demons? Like, what is it? When they come back, they have these like abilities that are pretty cool, but they look dead. They still look like dead little kids, so it's creepy in that sense. And there is this large religious group who obviously is totally against these kids coming back and thinks that they need to be killed and taken back to hell where they belong. So Mitch is trying to keep Sophie safe and stop this group from getting her. So that's the gist of the story. Okay, so overall, this book wasn't really scary. There was one scene in the beginning of the book when the children start to come back that kind of like gave me goosebumps, just because it was just like, whoa. I won't say what it is because it would be kind of spoilery, and like I said, it's a great scene that you really need to just experience. But besides that scene, there weren't really like spooky parts in this book, really at all. This book actually has a lot more heart than it does horror, and yeah, I think overall, the writing was okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I wished that there had been a little bit more like exposition in terms of Mitch and Sophie's relationship, because in the book she dies so early in the book, that you don't really get a chance to like bond with her as a character or to see her relationship with Mitch. So when she dies, you don't feel as emotionally affected, at least I didn't. And then the story just kind of goes from there. And then kind of towards the middle, it kind of got a little bit boring for me, plot-wise. I was like, kind of just like, okay, let's get through this and see if something else here is going to happen, because I was starting to get bored. But I think overall I enjoyed it. I liked the themes of like family, and love between like a parent and a child. Those kinds of things were, I thought, dealt with very well, considering that you're talking about like basically zombie children. So yeah, this book was okay. I I would say if you are looking for a new horror novel to read that has a little bit of heart, you would probably like this. And yeah, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I completed for the month of June was a nonfiction book that was sent to me for review. So thank you to Book Publicity Services, wow, for sending this book my way. The book is called The Girls Are Gone by Michael Brodkorb and Allison Mann. And this is a true crime book about these 2 teenage girls who went missing in Minnesota during their parents' really horrible, polarizing, bad divorce and custody battle. They were 13, I think they were like 13 and 15 at the time, if I remember right. And they were missing for over 2 years. So I don't know if I should say much more because it might be spoilery. I don't know. Okay, I'm just not going to say any more about the plot, just in case. Okay, so the story itself, this story, I had never heard of before getting this book. So I went into it completely blind, and it's a very crazy story. Like, it's one of those true stories that you hear where you're like, it's truth is stranger than fiction. Because it's just one of those stories that just, wow, that really happened. So yeah, the story is a strong one, and I can see why these 2 people wanted to write a book about it, because it is a compelling story, one that a lot of people I think would be interested in that kind of thing. However, I had some issues with the format of the book and with the writing of the book. So huge chunks of this book are basically court transcripts taken verbatim and put into the text, which I'm not totally against. I actually didn't really hate that because it was like, here are the facts. These are the facts we have, these testimonies. And it starts with all the way back when the parents are going through their divorce, and their divorce is just crazy. And so you're reading these court transcripts, and that was fine. I didn't mind that so much, but what would happen a lot was they would, basically put in the court transcript, you read the whole thing, and then they basically go back and they like reiterate what was already said in the court transcript, or what you have already, like, as a reader, have drawn from the court transcript. Like, you've already, you've put things together. But then they're like explaining it to you again, so it felt very redundant. They did that quite a bit in this book. Also, the same thing with the one author, Michael Brodkorb. He is a reporter who was working on covering this whole story of the missing girls. And so he has sections of the book where he kind of is talking about his experience and his involvement. And he would say, like, okay, so then I got this new detail or this new kind of development in the case, so I wrote an article about it. And he would tell you the development and everything, and then he'd put the article in there. And the article is saying basically what he already said. So again, there was like a lot of like repetitiveness, which got kind of old really quick. Also, I felt like the formatting was just kind of weird, because there were times where it was just like kind of in third person. You'd have the court transcripts. Then there were sections that were from Michael's perspective and sections that were from Allison's perspective. Allison Mann was a paralegal who worked for the husband in the divorce case, his lawyer's like law firm. She was a paralegal. So that was kind of how she got involved in the case. So it would kind of jump between those 3 points of view, but sometimes there wasn't like a distinction. I felt like when it would go from, like, let's say Michael's perspective back to that third person perspective. And so it got kind of weird. And then the biggest thing that I had with this was it was so biased. And I wish I had an example that I could show you where they basically are like, they're basically like feeding you their opinion, which in when I read a nonfiction book, I like to kind of come to those conclusions on my own, especially when a journalist is writing. I feel like that's like your number one job as a journalist, is to be objective and to just present the facts and to let people make up their own mind. And they were not doing that in this book. It was so one-sided. They were obviously so on the one side of the case, which they should be, because, I mean, the wife in this case, you find out pretty quickly, like, she's a total piece of shit. Like, she is. She's crazy. You know it just from reading the court transcripts. You're like, okay, this woman is definitely, like, there's something wrong with her. She's something else. You don't need to tell me that. I'm reading the facts and the information. I know that. You don't need to tell me that. And I just felt like I didn't like that they were doing that with the case and putting their, like, opinions and stuff into it, because I just felt like it wasn't necessary. I was kind of like, just present me with the facts, tell me the story, like, that's what you're supposed to do, and then I will make up my own mind. So parts of that were, irritating to me because it was just blatantly biased. You can tell that, and I can understand if the people on the one side refuse to talk to them and, like, wouldn't want to, like, be interviewed for this book. But then you just say, hey, we reached out to them and they didn't want to talk to us. But I don't think they did that anyway. They definitely were like, we're just going to write this, and yeah. So I definitely had issues with that, because I feel like nonfiction, to a certain extent, can have a little bit of opinion in it to kind of, I don't know, liven up the story if need be. But I don't think it was necessary in this story. I don't think it belonged in this book. So yeah. So overall, I think it's a slower read because of all the court stuff. Because I mean, you have pages where the type is, like, so small. Because the court transcript stuff is, like, in a smaller font than the rest of the book, and a lot of the book is this court stuff, so it does take a while to get through. It's a dense book. But I think if, like, it's something that you might be interested in, I would say check it out. But just be aware that there are definitely biases. There's a lot of repetitiveness, and there's a lot of grammatical errors. Like, it definitely could have used a little bit better editing in terms of, like, spelling errors and things like that. There was a lot of that in here. But other than that, I thought that it was, like I said, the story itself was very compelling. It held my interest, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Alright guys, so those are all the books that I read in the month of June. I just realized, after I've been talking about them all, that every single book I read in June was a 3-star. So it's kind of a mediocre month, right? It happens. What can I say? I don't think that's happened yet this year, but it happens. So please let me know down below what you guys managed to read in the month of June, because I would love to hear what everybody read. If you've read any of these books that I talked about here, let me know what you thought of them also. Other than that, I hope that June treated you well, and that July is also treating you well, and I will talk to you very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.